If you have ever stepped off a train into a town where no one knows your name, where the wind tastes like dust and the sky goes on forever without asking permission, then you already understand how Adeline Calloway felt the day she arrived in Dry Fork Valley, Montana territory. She was 22 years old. She owned one carpet bag, one good dress, a Bible her mother had pressed into her hands on the last morning of her life, and a folded letter from a man she had never met. Before we go any further into her story, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Leave a comment and tell me. If you love slow burn, Western romances, the kind where hearts crack open one careful sentence at a time, take a moment to subscribe so the next story finds you when the lamp is low and the evening is quiet. Now come sit closer. The stage is pulling into town and the man who brought her a ticket is standing on the platform with his hat pulled low, and neither of them knows yet that this bargain will ask more of them than either one is prepared to give. The October light over Dry Fork Valley that afternoon was the color of weak tea. The stagecoach groaned on its leather braces as it rolled in past the livery, past the feed store with its peeling paint, past the little white church whose bell hung silent in a cage of cottonwood branches. Adeline pressed her cheek against the window glass and watched the town of her future assemble itself in fragments: a water trough, a hitching rail, a dog asleep in a square of sun, two men in long coats who stopped their conversation to watch the coach arrive. She had imagined this moment every night for 6 weeks. In the imagining, she had been braver. In the imagining, she had known what to do with her hands. The stage driver set the brake and climbed down with the easy grace of a man who had never worried about whether a stranger would want him at the end of a journey. He opened the door for her, and Adeline gathered her skirt and stepped out into Montana for the first time in her life. The ground seemed to tilt under her boots. She had been riding for 4 days with only short stops at lonely stations, and her body had forgotten how to stand still. She steadied herself on the coach wheel and looked around the plank sidewalk for the face that belonged to the letter in her pocket. She did not have to look long. He was standing under the wooden awning of the general store, one shoulder against a post, his arms folded across his chest. He was tall enough that the awning beam nearly grazed the crown of his hat and leaned through the shoulders in the way of a man who spent his days doing work that never quite got finished. His coat was a dark canvas duster gone soft at the cuffs with wear. His boots were clean but scuffed at the toes. His face under the brim of a charcoal-colored hat was not the face of a cruel man, and it was not the face of a gentle one either. It was the face of a man who had decided a long time ago that feelings were an expense he could not afford. When her eyes met his, he did not smile. He did not step forward. He pushed off the post with his shoulder the way another man might have risen from a chair, and he crossed the dusty street toward her, and the October wind moved past him and kept going. "Miss Calloway." His voice was low, a little rough at the edges, like stones in a riverbed. "Jonah Rainer." "Mr. Rainer." Her own voice came out smaller than she had meant it to. She held out her gloved hand because her mother had taught her that was what a lady did when a lady was introduced even to a stranger, even to her husband. "I'm pleased to meet you, sir." He looked at her hand for half a breath before he took it. His grip was firm, dry and impersonal, the handshake of a man sealing a cattle deal. He let go quickly. "Is this all you brought?" He tipped his chin at the carpet bag the driver had set down beside her. "Yes, sir." "No trunk coming on a later coach?" "No, sir." Something moved in his face, not pity exactly and not surprise, something closer to the expression a man wears when he has been handed a ledger and the numbers are worse than he expected. He bent and lifted the carpet bag by its handles without comment. "Wagons this way." She followed him across the street, trying to keep her skirts out of the dirt, trying to walk like a woman who belongs somewhere. She was acutely aware of the eyes on her, the two men by the feed store, the woman sweeping the boardwalk in front of the milliners, the boy holding a horse at the hitching rail. A stranger came to Dry Fork only on business, and a woman stranger came for only one reason. Everyone in the valley would know by supper time that Jonah Rainer had finally taken delivery of a wife. The wagon waited by the water trough, a buckboard with a pair of patient bay horses in the traces. He set her bag in the bed and offered her his hand up to the seat, and she took it because she had to. And the moment their hands touched, she felt the calloused width of his palm and understood without needing to be told that this was a man who had worked for everything he owned. She climbed up, smoothed her skirt over her knees, and folded her hands in her lap. He walked around to the other side and climbed up beside her. The wagon leaned with his weight and then leveled. "We'll stop at the church first," he said. He gathered the reins without looking at her. Reverend Parrish said he'd be there until 4 o'clock. To the church, she had not known where to look during the stage ride, and she did not know where to look now. She looked at her hands. For the ceremony. For the paperwork. He clicked his tongue to the horses, and they stepped forward. There won't be a ceremony. She felt the words land somewhere below her ribs the way a cold hand feels when it touches skin that has been warm a long time. She had not expected a wedding with flowers. She had not expected a veil or a cake or anyone to give her away. But she had expected somewhere under the careful layers of her own humility to stand in front of a man of God and promise something. She had expected to say with a ring on her finger that she would love and honor and keep. She had thought that was how it worked even in the territories. She had thought even the coldest arrangement would be dressed up for decency's sake in a few words spoken aloud in a room with windows. "I see," she said. "It's a legal matter," he said. The wagon creaked over a rut. "The Reverend has the form. We sign he witnesses. He files it with the clerk next time he rides to Helena. You'll be Mrs. Rainer on the ride home." "Yes, Mr. Rainer." "Jonah," he said, though his voice had not warmed, "if we're going to live in the same house, you might as well call me by my name." "Yes, Jonah." He glanced at her then for the first time since the handshake. She felt the look travel across her profile, her bonnet, her cheek, the line of her jaw, and then return to the horses. Whatever he had seen, he did not say. The Reverend Parrish was waiting for them in the church vestibule with a pair of spectacles on the end of his nose and a form already laid out on a small oak table. He was a kind-looking man in a black coat that had been brushed too many times. He greeted Adeline with genuine warmth, clasped both her hands, asked after her journey, told her the Lord had brought her safely through a long country, and then he cleared his throat and turned to business. He read the form aloud so she would know what she was signing. He explained her rights as a wife under territorial law, which were small, and her obligations, which were many. He dipped a pen in an inkwell and handed it to her. Her hands shook. She made herself steady it. She wrote Adeline Marguerite Calloway in the line marked bride, and then she watched Jonah Rainer lean down and write Jonah E. Rainer in the line marked groom, and then the Reverend signed as witness, and then it was done. She was married. She was on the strength of a signature and an ink stamp another man's wife. There had been no music. There had been no ring. There had been no vow spoken out loud in front of God or anyone. The Reverend blotted the ink and said with a small, kind smile, "God bless this union." And Adeline thought he has not. But he will. He has to. Outside, Jonah lifted her back into the wagon and untied the team and climbed up, and they rolled out of Dry Fork Valley onto the road that would take them home. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sky had gone from weak tea to copper. On either side of the road, the grass stretched away to low brown hills that folded into higher blue ones, and somewhere out there, past a bend in a creek neither of them could see, was the Rainer Ranch. "Before we get there," he said when the town was an hour behind them, "I want to tell you how this is going to hit." She turned her face toward him. Yes. He did not look at her. He looked at the road between the horse's ears. "I did not want a wife. I want to be plain about that, because I will not have you sitting at my table imagining things that are not there. I needed somebody to keep the house. I needed somebody to look after my daughter Wren, who is 8 years old and has been running wild since her mother died. I needed somebody who would not leave in the spring when the work gets hard. The agency in St. Louis said you were a woman of good character." That was enough. She could not speak. She nodded because he had paused, and a pause seemed to require acknowledgement. "I will not touch you," he said. "Not tonight, not next week, not after a year has passed. The marriage is a legal protection for you and for Wren. I will give you a room of your own with a door that latches from the inside, and no one in that house will cross its threshold without your say-so. You will never be asked to do anything with me that a wife is usually asked to do. Do you understand?" She understood. She understood in the part of her that had been braced all week for something she did not know how to survive. The relief came up so quickly it frightened her, because behind it already was a grief she had not expected. Not being wanted in that way, yes, that was a mercy, but not being wanted at all, that was a different country. "Yes, Jonah," she said, "I understand." "Good." He clicked to the horses. One more thing. Wren will not take to you. She has not taken to anyone since her mother passed. Do not push her. Do not try to be her mother. She has a mother in the ground behind the house, and she has not finished being angry about it. Your job is to keep her fed and clothed and safe. That is all I am asking of you. Yes, Jonah. All right. He let out a long, slow breath like a man who had rehearsed a speech and was glad to have it finished. Now, tell me what you need for the kitchen. I have not been to the store in 2 weeks. And just like that, the conversation turned to flour and salt, and whether the hen house needed new wire. And Adeline Calloway, Adeline Rainer, now on paper, began to learn the shape of the life she had bought with her signature. They reached the ranch at twilight. It sat at the bottom of a shallow draw where two creeks met with a log house, whose chinking was new in some places and old in others, a barn larger than the house, a corral, a hen house, a smokehouse, and a half-dozen outbuildings that squatted around the yard in a loose working scatter. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney in a thin gray line. Light showed in one of the windows. Jonah pulled up in front of the house and set the brake and came around to help her down. And as her boots touched the packed dirt of the yard, the door of the house swung open and a girl stepped out. Wren Rainer was small for 8. She had hair the color of dark honey braided into 2 thick plaits that fell past her shoulders, and a thin freckled face and eyes that were the exact gray of a rain sky. She was wearing a calico dress that had been washed too many times. She was barefoot despite the cold. She stood in the rectangle of lamplight behind her and stared at Adeline with no expression at all, and then she looked at her father and said in a small, clear voice, "Is that her?" "That is her," Jonah said. "Wren, this is Adeline. She'll be staying with us." Wren looked back at Adeline. Her gray eyes did not blink. "You're not my mother," she said. "No," Adeline said. Her own voice surprised her with its steadiness. She stepped forward slowly, the way a person steps toward a skittish animal, and she stopped a respectful distance away. "No, I'm not. I'm very sorry about your mama, Wren. I would never try to take her place. I was hoping if it was all right with you that you might tell me her name sometime, so I could remember her too." For a moment, something flickered behind the gray eyes. Then it was gone. Wren turned without answering and walked back into the house. Jonah set the carpet bag down inside the door. He lit a second lamp and showed Adeline through the house, a front room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, and a pine table, a short hallway, 3 doors. He opened the first door. Wren's room. He opened the second. Mine. He opened the third. The room behind it was small, but clean. There was a rope bed with a wool blanket, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher, a chest of drawers, a window facing east, and a door with a brass latch on the inside. "Yours," he said. "The latch works. I checked it this morning." She stepped inside. The room smelled of lye soap and new wood. Someone, and she understood with a sudden tightness in her throat that it had been him, had put a sprig of dried lavender in a tin cup on the chest of drawers. The gesture was so small she might have missed it if she had not been looking. She did not know what to do with it. She did not know what it meant. "Thank you," she said. "Chipper's at 6, he said. "You don't have to cook tonight. There's cold beef and bread in the pie safe. Wren and I will eat at the table. You come when you're ready." "Yes, Jonah." He closed the door behind himself as he left. She heard his boots cross the front room, heard the scrape of a chair, heard Wren's small voice ask something she could not make out, heard Jonah answer in a low, steady tone that she could not make out either. She stood alone in the middle of her new room, with her hands pressed against her skirt and her carpet bag at her feet, and the dried lavender watching her from the chest of drawers like a small purple witness. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She took off her bonnet and set it beside her. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until the dark behind her eyelids went red, and then she took a long breath and lowered her hands and looked around. She was safe. For the first time in years, for the first time since her mother had died and her stepfather had come into the house with his belt and his temper and his eyes that slid over her in ways that had made her sleep with a kitchen knife under her pillow. She was safe. No one was going to come through that door tonight. No one was going to come through it tomorrow. She had a latch. She had a window. She had a chest of drawers that would hold her 3 dresses and her Bible and the little cloth bag with her mother's wedding ring in it. She had a name that was legally her own, sealed by a reverend signature, a name no man in Missouri could undo. And yet, she looked at the door. She listened to the low murmur of voices in the front room, a man and his daughter eating supper together the way they had always eaten supper together without her. She understood sitting there in the lamplight with the dried lavender on the chest of drawers that safety and love were two different rooms. She had been given the first. The second was not on offer. She was going to have to learn how to live in one room and not miss the other, and she did not yet know whether she had it in her. Outside her window, the Montana sky was deepening from copper to indigo, and the first stars were coming out over the low brown hills, and somewhere far off a coyote was starting its evening conversation with the rising moon. Lord, Adeline whispered into the quiet of her new room, I do not know what I am doing, but I am here. And if you brought me here on purpose, please show me why. And from the front room, very faintly, she heard a child's voice laugh at something her father had said. A small surprised laugh half swallowed the laugh of a child who had forgotten for half a second that she was supposed to be angry. The laugh did not belong to Adeline. It did not include her, but it was a sound of life in the house, and she let herself listen to it, and for a moment in the room with the latch and the lavender, she was not alone. Outside, the coyote called again. Closer this time. The first night of her marriage had begun. Adeline woke before the sun on her first morning as a married woman, and for a long, disoriented minute, she did not know where she was. The bed was narrower than the one she had shared with her cousin in Missouri. The ceiling above her was unpainted pine, instead of the water-stained plaster she had fallen asleep staring at for most of her life. The air smelled of cold wood smoke, and something sweet and dry the lavender on the chest of drawers. Then she remembered. Montana, the ranch, the man in the next room who had told her he would never touch her. The child who had said, "You're not my mother," and walked away. She lay still for another moment and listened. She could hear the house, the particular hush of a log building settling in the cold, the far-off creak of a barn door, the low whicker of a horse. She could hear nothing from the rooms on the other side of her door. Jonah had not risen yet, or if he had, he moved like a cat. She pushed back the blanket and set her bare feet on the cold plank floor. She lit the little candle on the chest of drawers with a sulfur match. By its wavering light, she dressed in her second-best calico, tied her hair up under a clean kerchief, and said her morning prayers aloud in a whisper, the way her mother had taught her, so the Lord would not have to guess what was in your heart. She asked for patience. She asked for humility. She asked a little shyly that the child Wren might let her into the kitchen without making a scene. Then she took up the candle and opened her door and stepped out into the hallway. The front room was dark and empty. The fire in the hearth had gone down to a bed of orange coals under gray ash. Adeline knelt in front of it the way she had knelt in front of 100 poor woman's fires in her life, and she fed it with kindling from the wood box and coaxed it back to flame, and when it was burning, she added 2 split pine logs and brushed the ash from her skirt. Then she went into the kitchen. The kitchen was a surprise. It was larger than she had expected, with a good cast-iron cook stove, a deep stone sink with a hand pump, a long pine work table scrubbed pale by years of use, and open shelves lined with tin cups and blue and white stoneware. It was also, she saw it with the quick eye of a woman who had been trained by necessity, the kitchen of a household without a mistress. The flour bin was half empty and the lid had been left askew. A cast-iron skillet sat on the stove with the hardened remains of yesterday's bacon grease. The butter was set too close to the window, where the morning sun would spoil it by noon. There was no coffee ground for breakfast. There were no eggs in the basket by the door, which meant no one had gone to the hen house yet. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and felt for the first time since the stagecoach the particular sweetness of knowing exactly what to do. By the time Jonah Rainer came out of his room in his stocking feet with his suspenders hanging at his sides, the cook stove was roaring, a pot of coffee was hissing on the back burner, a bowl of fresh eggs from the hen house sat on the table, bacon was curling in the skillet, and Adeline was turning biscuits out of a tin, with her sleeves rolled to the elbow and flour on her forearms. He stopped in the kitchen doorway as if he had walked into the wrong house. "I didn't expect you up so early," he said. "I've always been an early riser, sir." Jonah. She did not turn around. She slid the biscuits back into the oven and shut the door with her hip. "The coffee is ready if you'd like a cup. The bacon will be another minute." He stood where he was for another moment watching her work. Then he came into the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot, with the careful motions of a man who was not quite sure whether the kitchen was still his. He sat down at the table. He did not speak again until she set a plate of bacon and biscuits and 2 fried eggs in front of him. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." She took her own plate smaller with only 1 egg and 1 biscuit and sat down at the far end of the table. She folded her hands and waited. It took him a moment to understand why. Then he set down his fork and bowed his head, and in a voice that sounded rusty from disuse, he said grace, a short grace, 3 sentences long, the kind a man says when he has been saying it alone to an empty table for a while and has almost forgotten how. When he finished, he looked up, and she saw very briefly that something in his face had loosened. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. "My mother taught me. She was a farmer's daughter in Kentucky before she came west. She said a woman should be able to feed a man well enough that he would come home at supper time on purpose, and a child well enough that the child would remember the taste of her kitchen when she was gone." Adeline paused. "She died when I was 15. I'm sorry." "Thank you, Jonah." He did not ask her any more questions. She did not expect him to. They ate in a silence that was not quite comfortable and not quite hostile, the sullen silence of 2 strangers testing the weight of a room. Wren came out of her room while they were still eating. She had dressed herself in the same washed-out calico from the night before, her braids untidy, her feet still bare. She stopped in the kitchen doorway the way her father had stopped, and her gray eyes took in the cookstove and the coffee and the biscuits and the fried eggs, and they went narrow. "Papa," she said, "I can make my own breakfast." "I know you can, Wren." Jonah's voice was level. "Sit down. Miss Adeline has made plenty." "It's Mrs. Rainer now, Wren," Adeline said very gently, and Wren's face closed like a shutter. "I'm not hungry," Wren said. "Sit down," Jonah said again, and something in his tone, not harsh, just certain, made the child cross the kitchen and climb onto her stool at the table. Adeline set a plate in front of her. Wren did not touch the fork. She sat with her thin hands folded in her lap and stared at the wall across from her as if the biscuits did not exist. "Wren," Jonah began. "It's all right," Adeline said. She kept her voice easy. "It's a lot of new things all at once. Wren, if you change your mind, I'll wrap a biscuit in a cloth for you, and you can eat it in the barn. Your papa says you like to sit with the horses in the morning." Wren's gray eyes flicked to her sharp and startled, "You know about that," and then away. She climbed down from the stool without a word and walked out of the kitchen. Adeline heard the front door open and close. She kept her face carefully neutral and went on eating her biscuit. Across the table, Jonah had gone still. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a tool he has never seen used before. "How did you know?" he asked. "About the barn. You told me yesterday in the wagon. You said she'd been running wild since her mother died, and she spent her mornings in the barn with the horses. I was paying attention, Jonah." He set down his fork. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Thank you for not pressing her." "I wasn't going to press her." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm thanking you." And that was the first moment, though Adeline did not know it yet, and Jonah would not have admitted it if you had put a pistol to his head, that something in the frozen ground between them gave a very small crack. The days that followed fell into a shape. Adeline rose before dawn and made breakfast. Jonah came in from the first round of chores, ate, and went back out. Wren drifted through the kitchen like a small ghost, ate or did not eat, and then vanished to the barn, to the creek, to the hen house where she had a favorite brown hen she called Beatrice. Adeline cleaned the kitchen, scrubbed the floors, aired the bedding, mended the men's shirts she found in a basket nobody had touched in months, and carried water from the pump to the wash tub and the wash tub to the line. In the afternoon, she churned butter, pressed cheese, put up the last of the autumn tomatoes in jars she scoured until they shone, and baked bread twice a week, because a house with bread in it was a house where a child would eventually get hungry. In the evenings, she cooked supper and set 3 plates and sat at the far end of the table while Jonah and Wren ate with the slow, careful politeness of 2 people who had learned to eat in silence and did not intend to change for her. She did not push. She did not talk unless they spoke to her first. She asked Jonah's permission for every small thing. "May I move the butter crock to the north shelf? May I take down the curtains to wash them? May I plant a few rows of kale by the kitchen door before the first hard frost?" And every time he said, You don't have to ask, it's your house now. And every time she said, I know, I just wanted you to know, and he would nod and go back to his coffee. She understood what she was doing. She was teaching him one small request at a time that she was not going to take anything without permission. That her presence in his house was an offer, not an invasion. That he was safe from her, just as she was safe from him. It was the only gift she could think to give him, and she gave it every day. At night, she latched her door from the inside the way he had promised she could, and she sat on the edge of the narrow bed by the light of her candle and read her mother's Bible, and she listened to the sounds of the house, Jonah's boots, Wren's soft cough, the pop and settle of the fire, and she did not let herself cry. She had cried enough in her life. She had decided on the stagecoach west that she was going to spend the rest of her crying sparingly and only on things worth it, and a cold marriage in a warm house was not worth it. Wren was harder. Wren was harder because Wren was testing on her. On the third morning, Adeline found her good wool stockings, one of only 2 pairs she owned, laid out on the kitchen table in a puddle of spilled molasses. On the 5th morning, the dried lavender from the tin cup on her chest of drawers was gone, and the cup was full of henhouse dirt. On the 6th morning, while Adeline was taking bread out of the oven, Wren walked past her and said loud enough for Jonah to hear from the front room, "My mama's bread was better." Adeline set the bread on the rack. She wiped her hands on her apron. She turned around and looked at Wren, who was standing in the middle of the kitchen with her small, sharp chin lifted in the air, waiting to be yelled at. "I'm sure it was," Adeline said. "Would you tell me what made it better? I'd like to learn if you're willing to teach me." Wren's mouth opened. Wren's mouth closed. Wren turned on her heel and walked out of the kitchen. From the front room it came Jonah's voice, low and very dry. "That's not fair, Adeline. You're not supposed to win at this." She put her hand over her mouth to hide the laugh. It was the first thing he had said to her that was not about salt or flour or the weather, and it had a note in it she had not heard from him before, something almost like warmth. "I'm not winning, Jonah," she called back, keeping her voice level. "I'm just trying to not lose." There was a pause, then from the front room, It was not much. It was the sound a man makes when he has noticed something and decided not to say more about it. But it stayed with her all afternoon. The first time he touched her was an accident, and she did not expect it, and neither did he. It was the end of the 2nd week. The weather had turned. A long, cold rain had come down for a day and a night, and when Adeline went out at dawn to gather eggs, she slipped on a patch of mud at the side of the henhouse and came down hard on her left hand. She felt the sting of a sharp stone under her palm and pushed herself up and looked, and there was a deep, jagged cut across the heel of her hand that was pumping blood in bright red threads. It was not going to kill her, but it was not going to stop on its own either. She cradled the hand against her apron and walked back toward the house. And she was almost at the kitchen door when Jonah came around the corner from the barn with a bucket in each hand and saw her. He set the buckets down so fast one of them tipped over. He crossed the yard in 3 long strides. "Let me see." "It's all right. Let me see, Adeline." She held out the hand. He took her wrist between his thumb and his fingers as carefully as if her bones were made of glass, and he turned her palm up to the gray morning light, and she watched his face as he looked at the cut. His jaw went tight. "Come inside," he said. "Now." He walked her into the kitchen and sat her down at the pine table and went to a shelf she had not been into yet and came back with a tin box that held a clean linen cloth, a small brown bottle of carbolic, and a curved needle already threaded. He set them out on the table. He sat down on the bench next to her, closer than he had ever sat, and he took her hand in both of his and rested it on his knee. "This is gonna hurt," he said. "There is a cut stone in that mud, and it is deeper than it looks. I am going to clean it, and then I am going to put 3 stitches in it, and then you are going to sit here for 10 minutes while I bandage it, and then you are going to let me cook breakfast for one morning. In my own life. Do you understand?" "Yes, Jonah." His hands were rough. She had known they would be, but they were also careful in a way she had not been touched in many years, careful the way her mother had been careful when she had drawn a splinter out of Adeline's finger with a sewing needle by candlelight. He poured the carbolic over the cut, and she bit her lip and did not make a sound. He blotted it with the linen. He threaded the needle more carefully than he had needed to because it was already threaded, and she understood that he was giving himself a moment. "Your hand is shaking," she said. "I know it is. Mine isn't. I know it isn't." He looked up at her from under the brim of his hat. His eyes were a darker blue than she had thought, the blue of a creek where the bottom is deep and the trout hide. That is something I am going to think about later, Adeline Rayner. Right now, hold still. He put in the 3 stitches. She held still. When he was done, he tied off the thread and cut it with a pair of small scissors, and pressed a folded square of linen against the wound, and wrapped it around her hand and around her wrist with a long strip of clean cotton, and he tied the knot with his teeth because his fingers were occupied, and somewhere during the tying, the heel of his palm brushed the pulse at the inside of her wrist. He froze. She felt him feel it, the steady, too fast beat of her heart under the thin skin of her wrist, a thing that could not lie and did not know how to. She did not pull her hand away. She did not breathe. She looked at the top of his hat, and then she looked down at his hands, his big scarred hands, holding hers the way a man holds something he has been told not to drop. He let her go. He let her go slowly, finger by finger, the way a man releases a wild bird he has caught by accident. He stood up from the bench so that he was no longer sitting next to her. He gathered the tin box and the carbolic and the scraps of linen with motions that were suddenly clumsy. He did not look at her. I'll fry the eggs, he said. Sit there, Jonah. Sit there, Adeline. She sat there. Her bandaged hand lay in her lap like a small wounded animal. Her pulse was still hammering at the inside of her wrist where his thumb had been, and she understood all at once, without warning, that safety and love were 2 different rooms, yes, but she had been wrong about the doors. She had thought the door between them was locked. She had just felt it move just a little under her hand. Jonah cracked 4 eggs into the skillet with his back to her, and he did not turn around. And when he spoke, his voice was very careful. After breakfast, he said, I am going to ride into town for the mail. Is there anything you need from the store? No, Jonah. All right. He rode into town that morning, and he stayed all day, and he did not come back until after dark. When he did come back, he went straight to the barn to unsaddle his horse, and from the kitchen window, Adeline watched his lantern move in the dark square of the barn door for a long time. She did not think he was unsaddling a horse for that long. She thought he was standing in the dark talking to himself, or talking to his dead wife, or talking to God. She thought he was deciding something. When he finally came in, she had his supper keeping warm on the back of the stove. He ate it standing at the sink with his back to her. He said, Thank you, Adeline, and he went to his room and shut the door. She blew out the lamp and went to her own room and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her bandaged hand against her mouth. And in the dark, she discovered that she had been wrong about something else. She had thought she was going to have to learn how to live in a house without love. She had not thought about what it would be like to live in a house where love was possible and forbidden at the same time. Outside the window in the black night over Dry Fork Valley, the coyotes were talking again. Closer now, bolder, their thin voices rising and falling in the cold. Adeline listened to them for a long time before she slept. And in the room across the hall, separated from her by a wall of chink logs and a door that was latched on both sides, Jonah Rainer was not sleeping either. The weather turned in the last week of October. The long rain froze overnight into a thin crust on the grass, and the cottonwoods down by the creek lost the rest of their leaves in a single afternoon of wind, and the sky over Dry Fork Valley took on the hard pewter color of a pan that has been scoured too many times. Winter was not here yet. Winter was coming at them like a slow wagon on a downhill road. Everyone in the valley could feel it in the bones of their knees when they knelt by the stove in the mornings, and everyone in the valley was putting up the last of the garden and checking the chinking on the north walls of their houses and counting how many cords of wood were split and stacked and how many were not. Adeline's hand healed clean. Jonah took out the stitches himself on the 7th day with the same small pair of scissors and the same careful fingers and the same averted eyes. And when he was done, he pressed the pad of his thumb once against the pale pink line of the scar, as if to test whether it was really closed. And then he stood up from the bench and walked out of the kitchen without saying anything, and Adeline sat at the table with her hand in her lap and watched him go. She understood him a little better now. She understood that every time he came near her, he spent something, some kind of coin she could not see, but he could feel, and that he did not have an unlimited supply. She understood that when he walked out of a room quickly, it was not because he disliked her. It was because he was running out of whatever the coin was, and he needed to go somewhere and earn more before he came back. She began to measure him by the distance he put between them after each accidental closeness. At first, after a moment of too nearness, he would stay out of the house until dark. Then it was only until supper. Then it was only until he had finished splitting a log or two in the yard. She watched the distance shrink and did not say a word about it to anyone. She did not even say it to herself, because saying it would have felt like trying to catch a bird by naming them. Ren changed too, but Ren changed the way a river changes slowly in the places you were not looking at. It began with the hen house. Ren's favorite hen, Beatrice, stopped laying in the second week of October. For 3 days, there was no brown egg in the straw, and Ren went to the hen house every morning and came out with her thin shoulders drawn up around her ears and her face tight with a worry too big for an 8-year-old to carry alone. On the fourth morning, Adeline was in the kitchen rolling out pie dough when Ren came in through the back door carrying Beatrice like a limp, feathered bundle against her chest. "She's sick," Ren said. Her gray eyes were wet. She did not step any closer to Adeline than she had to. "Something is wrong with her. Her crop is all hard." Adeline set down her rolling pin and wiped her hands on her apron. "May I look?" Ren hesitated. Then she held out the hen. Adeline took Beatrice carefully the way she had once taken her baby brother when her mother had been too sick to hold him, and she felt the crop with her fingers, and she felt the small hard lump of whatever the hen had eaten and not been able to pass. She had seen it before. Her grandmother in Kentucky had a trick for it. "Ren," she said, "will you do something for me? Will you go to the pantry and bring me the jar of olive oil, the one on the top shelf, and a little spoon from the drawer, and then a soft cloth and a shallow bowl of warm water from the stove reservoir?" Ren went without answering and came back with all four things. Adeline sat down at the kitchen table with the hen in her lap. She warmed a little olive oil in the bowl of the spoon over the stove. She tilted Beatrice's head back very gently and worked the oil into her beak a few drops at a time, and she showed Ren how to massage the crop in small, slow circles with the side of her finger to help break up the impaction. She let Ren take over the massaging while she held the hen. They worked together at the kitchen table for the better part of an hour. Neither of them spoke for most of it. Ren's small fingers moved with the stubborn concentration of a child who had been told she could do something useful and was not going to stop until she had done it. When the lump in the crop had softened and begun to yield, Beatrice gave a small, indignant cluck and scrambled upright in Adeline's lap, and Ren let out a breath that Adeline realized the child had been holding for days. "She's going to be all right," Adeline said. "Keep her warm tonight. Don't let her outside in the cold. Give her just a little water in the morning and nothing to eat until tomorrow afternoon, and then only a handful of soft grain. By day after tomorrow, she'll be back to laying." Ren took the hen back into her own arms. She stood there in the middle of the kitchen for a long moment, and Adeline saw the child's small, sharp chin begin to tremble, and she saw Ren bite down on it and stop it. Ren was too old to cry over a chicken in front of a stranger. Ren was also at that moment too young not to. "Thank you," Ren whispered. She said it so quietly Adeline almost did not hear her. "You're very welcome, Ren." Ren carried Beatrice to her room and made her a nest of old flannel in a wooden box beside her bed. From that day forward, not all at once, and not without relapses, but beginning in that afternoon, Ren stopped looking at Adeline as if Adeline were a trespasser. She did not call her mama. She did not sit in her lap. She did not ask to have her hair braided. But she stopped putting dirt in Adeline's tin cup, and she started leaving her own dishes in the wash basin instead of the floor. And one morning, Adeline found on the kitchen table, where the molasses-soaked stockings had been, a single small apple from the root cellar polished on a calico skirt until it shone with no note at all. Adeline picked up the apple and held it in both hands. Then she put it in the pocket of her apron and did not speak of it, and at supper that night across the table, Ren's gray eyes met hers for one brief half-second and then flicked away. It was enough. The first visitor came on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of November. Adeline was in the yard taking in a line of washing that had frozen stiff in the wind and then begun to thaw again, and she did not hear the buggy at first. When she turned around with an armful of stiff sheets, there was a woman stepping down from the buggy seat with the fluidity of a person who had done it 1,000 times. She was perhaps 35 tall and strong-shouldered, with auburn hair wound into a thick coil at the nape of her neck, in a dove-gray traveling coat that had clearly been ordered from a catalog in Denver. She was beautiful in the way of a woman who knew she was beautiful and had decided that knowing was enough. She tied her horse to the hitching rail and turned toward the kitchen door, and only then did she see Adeline with the frozen sheets. "Oh," the woman said. Her voice was warm as honey and just as careful. "You must be the new Mrs. Rainer. I'm Hester Vance. I live on the next place over about 4 miles east. I was going into Dry Fork for thread and I thought I would call." "Mrs. Vance, it's a pleasure." Adeline set the sheets down on the edge of the porch and wiped her red, cold hands on her apron and stepped forward to shake hands. Hester's hand was smooth. Adeline's was not. She was aware of the difference. "Please come in. I'll put on coffee." Hester Vance came in. She took off her gray coat, and under it she was wearing a wool dress in a russet color that flattered her auburn hair in a way that even Adeline, who had never owned a dress that color, could see. She sat down at the pine table as if she had sat at it many times before, and perhaps she had. Adeline set the coffee pot on the front burner and put out 2 cups in the molasses jar and a plate of the shortbread cookies she had baked the day before. "It's so good of you to call, Mrs. Vance." "Hester, please." Mrs. Vance was my mother-in-law, and she was a grim old thing. Hester smiled. "I wanted to come sooner. I would have, but my husband has been poorly." She took a cookie and broke it in half. "How are you finding ranch life, Adeline?" "May I call you Adeline?" "Of course. I'm finding it, well, thank you. The Rainers have been very kind." "Both of them?" A small smile. "Or only one?" Adeline felt the edge in the question before she could name it. She kept her face still. "Wren is 8. She is managing the best she can." "Oh, I know she is." Hester dipped her half cookie in her coffee. "She's had a hard time. Jonah has too, of course. Poor man, Mary's death took the heart out of him for a long while. I don't think I ever saw a man grieve the way he did." "It sounds as though you knew her." "Mary? Oh yes, Mary was a good friend to me." Hester's eyes, which were the color of brown sugar, did not leave Adeline's face. "She was the best friend I had in this valley. We rode together twice a week. I helped nurse her at the end. I held her hand the last night of her life. I am very sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Adeline. That is kind." Hester took another small sip of her coffee. "I suppose it must be strange for you, coming into a house where another woman's memory is still so present." Wren was too small to remember her mother clearly, but the house remembers her. Jonah remembers her. I remember her. There is only so much room in a household for a new wife when the old one has not yet been let go of. Don't you think? Adeline set down her own cup very carefully so that the china would not ring against the saucer. "There it is," she thought. "That is what she came here for." She folded her hands in her lap. "I did not come here to replace Mary Rainer," she said. Her voice was quiet the way her mother's voice had been quiet when she was saying the thing that mattered most. "I did not come here to make Jonah forget her or to make Wren forget her. I came because I needed a roof and Jonah needed a housekeeper. And the rest, if there is a rest, is between him and me and the Lord. I do not think that is any of the neighborhood's business, Hester. But I thank you for the call, and I thank you for your concern, and I hope your husband is soon well." The smile on Hester Vance's face did not change, but something behind her eyes did. She had come prepared for a frightened country girl who could be made to feel small with a few well-placed sentences, and she had found instead a woman who had been raised by necessity and spoke like her mother's daughter. She set down her cup. "Well," she said, "you are not quite what I was expecting, Adeline Rainer. I am sorry if I have disappointed." "Oh no." Hester's smile sharpened a fraction. "On the contrary, this is going to be more interesting than I had thought." She stood. "Thank you for the coffee. Tell Jonah I called." "Tell him." And here she paused just long enough that Adeline could hear what was not being said. "Tell him I have not forgotten our conversation at the 4th of July picnic." She took her coat. She went out to her buggy. She drove away east down the road to the next ranch, and Adeline stood in the kitchen doorway with a pain like a small hot stone lodged under her breastbone and watched the buggy until it disappeared around the bend in the road. And then she went inside and poured the remaining coffee down the sink with hands that were perfectly steady because her mother had taught her that a woman could tremble inside and not outside, and the inside was nobody's business but her own. When Jonah came in for supper that evening, she did not tell him about the visit. She did not tell him because she did not know what to tell him. She did not know what the conversation at the 4th of July picnic had been. She did not know whether Hester Vance had been speaking as a grieving friend of the dead wife, or as a woman who had once had a claim on Jonah Rainer herself, or as both. She did not know whether Jonah had answered that conversation and what he had answered. And she did not know whether her own place in this house gave her the right to ask. So she set his plate in front of him, and she sat down at the far end of the table, and she listened to Wren tell her father about Beatrice, the hen, who had laid her first egg in 4 days that morning, and she did not look at either of them too long. And after supper, she went to her room and latched the door and read her Bible until her eyes ached. And the next evening, the second visitor came. This one she had been expecting. The knock on the front door came just after sundown. Jonah was still out at the barn. Wren was sitting cross-legged in front of the fire with a wooden doll her mother had made her, pretending to give the doll supper on a small tin plate. Adeline went to the door and opened it, and the man on the porch was a stranger, a tall man in a long, dark coat with a silver star pinned to the front of it. He had a neatly trimmed gray beard and tired, kind eyes. He took off his hat when he saw her. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Bram Holloway out of Dry Fork. I'm looking for Jonah Rainer." "My husband is in the barn, Sheriff. Won't you come in by the fire while I fetch him?" "That's kind of you, ma'am. I'll wait here if you don't mind. The cold don't bother me." She went out the back and across the yard to the barn. Jonah was at the far end, forking hay down from the loft, and when she called him, he came down the ladder with hay in his hair and the question already on his face. "Sheriff Holloway is at the front door," she said. "He's asking for you." Jonah went very still. Then he set the pitchfork against the wall and brushed the hay off his coat and walked back to the house with long, quick strides, and Adeline walked beside him and did not ask what it was about because she already knew. She had known since the stage had rolled into Dry Fork Valley that one day a man with a star on his coat would come looking for her, and that the only question was whether the man would be from Montana or from Missouri. Sheriff Holloway was still on the porch, still holding his hat. He greeted Jonah by name. Jonah invited him in. The three of them sat at the kitchen table. The sheriff, Jonah, and Adeline and Wren was sent to her room with a book and a candle and a firm word from her father, and the sheriff cleared his throat and opened a small leather wallet and took out a folded paper. "Jonah," he said, "I've had a letter from a United States Marshal in St. Joseph, Missouri. It was addressed to me because I'm the law in Dry Fork, and the marshal was making inquiries about a young woman he believes may have traveled west to our county." He looked at Adeline. The look was not unkind. "The young woman's name is given as Adeline Marguerite Calloway, 22 years old. Dark hair, gray eyes, last seen in St. Joseph on the 14th of September. The marshal is asking whether she has been seen in our county, and if so, whether she is safe and of sound mind." There was a silence. The stove ticked. A log shifted in the fire in the next room. Adeline put her hands flat on the table so that neither of the men would see them shake. "Sheriff Holloway," she said, "I am Adeline Marguerite Calloway. I am Adeline Rainer now as of the 20th of October by signature and witness of the Reverend Parish of Dry Fork. I am of sound mind. I am safe. I came west of my own free will under contract with the St. Louis Matrimonial Agency because my circumstances in Missouri had become," she stopped, started again, "had become dangerous to my person. I will answer any question you ask me, Sheriff, but I would ask before I do that you tell me who is looking for me and why." The sheriff looked at her for a long moment. She saw him weigh her, the steady voice, the flat hands, the absence of hysterics against whatever he had been told to expect. "The man who sent the inquiry," he said, "is a Mr. Rufus Blackwood of Jackson County, Missouri. He claims you are a promised woman under a private contract between himself and your stepfather, a Mr. Silas Dorsey, dated June of this year. He claims you absconded from that contract and that he is pursuing the matter both civilly and—" The sheriff's mouth tightened. "Personally, he has indicated to the marshal that he intends to come west." Across the table from her, Jonah Rainer had gone absolutely still. His hands were flat on the wood. His face was at a closed door. "Sheriff," Adeline said, her voice was almost gentle, "I was never asked by my stepfather whether I wanted to enter into that contract. I was informed of it the night it was signed. Silas Dorsey is not my father. He is my mother's second husband, and he has no legal claim on me under any law I have ever read. I took my mother's Bible and $12 of my own wages from the dressmaking shop where I worked, and I bought a ticket west, and I answered the advertisement that Jonah Rainer placed in the St. Louis paper, and I came here by my own choice. I am not a promised woman. I am a married woman. And Rufus Blackwood has no more right to me than a stranger in the street. I believe you, ma'am. The sheriff folded the paper and put it back in his wallet. I will write the marshal tonight and tell him that the woman in question is lawfully married and under the protection of her husband in my county, and that any claim Mr. Blackwood wishes to press will be heard in my court on my ground, not his. That will slow him down. It will not stop him. He looked at Jonah. If this man comes to Dry Fork, Jonah, I want to know about it before he gets to your ranch. Will you send word? I will send word, Jonah said. It was the first thing he had said since the sheriff had taken out the paper. His voice had gone low and quiet and cold the way a creek goes quiet just before it freezes. Sheriff Holloway stood. He put on his hat. He nodded to Adeline a real nod, the nod of a man who had come to do a duty and found he was doing something a little different than he had expected. And he went out into the night, and the sound of his horse's hooves on the frozen yard faded into the dark. Adeline sat at the table with her hands still flat on the wood. She did not look at Jonah. She could not. Adeline, he said. Yes, Jonah. Look at me. She looked at him. His face across the lamp was the face of a man who had just been handed a piece of information that rearranged the furniture of his own heart and was trying with some difficulty to figure out where the furniture had gone. You should have told me, he said, about this man, about your stepfather. I would have paid the fare. I would have met the stage in Helena. I would have... He stopped. He dragged a hand down his face. I would have come for you if I had known. I didn't know you yet, she said. I didn't know whether you were a good man or a bad one. I was afraid that if I told you the whole truth on the first day, you would put me back on the stage to save yourself the trouble. I am not proud of being afraid, Jonah, but I was. He looked at her for a long time. I'm going to ask you something, he said finally, and I want you to answer me true. Is there anything else? Anything else I should know before this man comes, if he comes? She thought about it. She thought about the little cloth bag at the bottom of her carpet bag, which held her mother's wedding ring, and a folded letter she had not told anyone about, a letter her mother had written to her in the last month of her life, and given her with instructions to open it only when she was in a safe place. She had not opened it yet. She did not think Dry Fork Valley was safe yet. She was not ready to tell him about the letter because she did not know what was in it. There is one thing, she said. I will tell you when I am ready, not tonight. Is that enough? That is enough. He stood up from the table. He walked around it until he was standing behind her chair. He put one hand on her shoulder, just the palm of it, the lightest weight, and he let it rest there for perhaps 3 seconds, and then he took it away. Go to bed, Adeline, he said. I will keep the lamp burning in the front room tonight. She went to bed. In her room, she did not light the candle. She sat in the dark on the edge of the bed with her hand pressed against the place on her shoulder where his palm had been. And she understood that something very important had happened at that kitchen table, something that the sheriff and the letter from Missouri had only been the door for. Jonah Rainer had not yet said he loved her. Jonah Rainer might never say he loved her. But Jonah Rainer had just put his hand on her shoulder for the first time on purpose without any medical emergency to excuse it, and he had done it because he had learned in the space of a single evening that there were other men in the world who might try to put their hands on her, and he did not mean to let them. It was not the same as love, but it was not nothing. The storm hit 4 nights later. It came down out of the north without much warning, the way big storms always did in that country. And by the time Jonah came in from the yard in the late afternoon, his beard was white with ice, and the snow was already halfway to his knees. The wind was a low, steady howl coming around the corner of the barn. The horses in the corral had turned their tails to the wind and were bunched against the rails. Jonah banged the snow off his coat in the mudroom and came into the kitchen and looked at Adeline, who was stacking the supper plates, and he said, I have to go to the south pasture. There are 8 head of cattle in the lee of the butte down there, and if I don't bring them into the big shed by dark, they will be dead by morning. I am taking the 2 geldings, and I am riding light. I want you and Wren in this house with the door barred and the lamps low until I get back. If I am not back by 10 o'clock, I want you to do one thing and one thing only. Put the big kettle on the stove and keep it boiling. Do you understand? Yeah, I am. Yes, Jonah. The kettle is a signal. If I come back and I am hurt, I will need hot water fast. If I do not come back, the kettle means the house is still warm and you and Wren are still alive. Do you understand? Yes, Jonah. He was at the door when she caught his sleeve. She had not meant to. Her hand moved before her mind did. Come back, she said. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve. Then he looked at her face, Adeline. Come back, Jonah. That's all I'm asking. Come back. He covered her hand with his for one brief second. His glove was cold. Under it, his fingers were warm. I will, he said. He went out into the storm. He did not come back by 10 o'clock. At 11, Adeline put the big kettle on the stove. At midnight, she filled it again. At 1 in the morning, she was still sitting at the kitchen table with Wren asleep on a pile of quilts on the floor beside her, and the wind screaming in the chimney, and the lamp trimmed low, and she had a Bible open in front of her, and she was not reading it. She was listening. She was listening for a sound under the wind that did not belong to the wind. At 1:30, she heard it, the faint thud of hooves on packed snow, slow and irregular, the walk of a horse that had come a long way and was going no farther. She was on her feet before the second thud. She threw her shawl around her shoulders and ran to the front door and pulled back the bar, and the wind shoved the door open before she could and flung snow into her face. He was 20 feet from the porch. He was on foot. He was leading one horse by the bridle. The other horse was gone. He was walking crooked, half falling with each step, and when the lamplight from the open door hit his face, she saw that there was a long, dark stain down the right side of his coat from his shoulder to his waist. Jonah, barn, he said. His voice was a rasp. Horse first. No, Jonah, you first. The horse will freeze. I will get the horse in the barn after I get you in the house. The horse can stand 5 more minutes. You cannot. She went out into the snow in her house shoes, and she got her shoulder under his good arm, and she walked him the 20 feet to the porch, one staggering step at a time. He was heavier than she had expected. She got him into the kitchen and lowered him into a chair by the stove. His coat was stiff with frozen blood on the right side. She could not tell yet how bad it was. She pulled off his gloves. His fingers were white. She pulled off his hat. His hair was crusted with ice. Wren, she said, and Wren was already awake, already sitting up, already wide-eyed. Wren, I need you to be brave. Go to the linen chest. Bring me every clean cloth you can find. Then bring me the tin box with the carbolic and the needle. Can you do that? Yes, Wren said. And she went. Adeline got Jonah's coat open. The wound was high on the right side, just under the collarbone, a long, shallow slice that had bled a great deal, but had stopped on its own against the pressure of the coat. A branch, she thought. A frozen branch whipped by the wind in the dark. She felt the relief wash through her like a warm wave, because it was not a gunshot, and it was not a horn wound, and he was not going to die. Jonah, can you hear me? I hear you. The wound is not deep. I am going to clean it and stitch it. You are going to be all right. I got 6 of the 8, lost 1 in the wash. The dun mare put her foot in a hole. I had to. He stopped. He closed his eyes. I had to leave her. I know. It's all right. You did what you had to do. She cleaned the wound. She stitched it her own stitches this time, not as neat as his had been, but clean and tight and careful. Wren held the lamp for her without being asked. Wren did not flinch when she saw the blood. Wren held the lamp with both hands, and her small face set in an expression Adeline had not seen on it before, the expression of a child who was being counted on by a grown-up and was meeting the count. When Adeline was done, Wren set down the lamp and climbed onto Jonah's lap on the good side and buried her face in his shirt and began to cry, not loudly, not the way children cry when they want something, but the way children cry when they have been frightened a long time and have only just been allowed to put the fear down. Jonah put his good arm around her. He looked at Adeline over the top of Wren's head. Come here, he said. She came. She knelt on the floor beside the chair. He lifted his hand, the one that was not holding Wren, and he cupped the side of her face, and his palm was cold from the storm, but his thumb, when it moved against her cheek, was warm. You said come back, he said. His voice was very low. I came back. Yes, Jonah. I came back because you said it. I want you to know that. Yes, Jonah. He looked at her mouth. She saw him look at it. She saw him decide in the course of one breath that he was going to kiss Oaser, and then she saw him decide in the course of the next breath that he was not. "You deserve," he said very slowly, "a better man than me, Adeline Rayner. Jonah, a man who would have come for you in St. Joseph instead of making you ride a stage 4 days alone. A man who would not have made you sleep in a cold room with a latch on your door for 3 weeks before he learned your name. A man whose dead wife is not still sitting in the other chair at his kitchen table." His thumb brushed her cheek again, and then he took his hand back and he let it rest on the top of Wren's honey-colored hair. "I am trying to become that man. I don't know if I can. I wanted you to know I'm trying." "I know," she whispered. "I've known since the morning you gave me the lavender." He looked at her sharply. "You saw the lavender?" "I saw it. I didn't know you had seen it. I saw it the first night. I saw what it meant." He closed his eyes. He leaned his head back against the wood of the chair. In his lap, Wren had gone quiet, her breath evening, out into sleep. The storm was still howling outside. The kettle was still boiling on the stove. The three of them were alive and together in the yellow lamplight of the kitchen. And no one was going to die tonight. And something that had been frozen in the house of Jonah Rainer for 3 years had just very quietly, without anyone saying so, begun to thaw. Adeline got up. She got the horse in the barn. I know. She came back in and barred the door. She banked the fire and blew out the lamp. She helped Jonah to his bed because he could not quite manage the buttons of his shirt alone, and she left him there with a clean compress over the wound and a cup of water on the table beside him, and she carried Wren, who was still asleep, to her own small bed and tucked her in under her mother's quilt. Then she went to her own room and latched the door out of habit, not necessity. She lay down on her back in the dark. She did not know what Rufus Black would look like. She did not know when he would come. She did not know how the letter at the bottom of her carpet bag, her mother's letter, the one she had not opened, fit into any of this. She did not know what Hester Vance had meant by the 4th of July picnic, and she did not know what Jonah Rainer had answered, and she did not know yet whether she was brave enough to ask. But she knew that the door between the room of safety and the room of love was no longer locked. She knew it was just standing ajar, waiting in a house in the middle of a frozen valley under a sky full of storm. And she knew that the man on the other side of the door had tonight, for the first time, leaned against it. The storm blew itself out by sunrise, and the valley woke under 2 feet of new snow that sparkled so brightly under the morning sun it hurt to look at. Jonah Rainer slept late for the first time Adeline had known him. She moved through the house on quiet feet, stoked the fires, milked the cow in the lean-to beside the barn, because it had to be done, and nobody else could do it, hauled the buckets back through the drifts, and started breakfast. Wren came out of her room in her night dress with her braids half undone and climbed onto a stool at the kitchen table without a word, and without a word, Adeline set a cup of warm milk with a spoonful of molasses in it in front of her, and the child drank it and did not say anything and did not need to. When Jonah finally came into the kitchen, it was nearly 9 o'clock. He was moving stiffly, and he had his right arm held close against his side, but he was on his feet. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her, at the way she was turning bacon in the skillet with her left hand while she stirred porridge with her right, at the braid of dark hair down the back of her calico dress, at the small straight set of her shoulders, and he did not say good morning. He said quietly, "You have been up for hours." "Yes." "You milk the cow. Mabel gets unhappy if you keep her waiting. Mabel is not a cow who has opinions. Mabel has opinions. You just haven't been listening to her." Something that was almost a laugh moved through him. He crossed the kitchen slowly and sat down at the table across from Wren. Wren reached out with one small hand and laid it on his good forearm, and Jonah looked down at his daughter's hand on his sleeve and did not speak for a moment. Adeline set a plate of bacon and porridge and a cup of coffee in front of him. She did not kiss the top of his head as she set the plate down. She had thought about it just for an instant, the way a person thinks about stepping off a curb into a street, and then she had not done it. There was still too much between them that had not been said out loud, and she was not going to put her mouth anywhere until the words had caught up to her heart. They ate breakfast together, all three of them, for the first time, without any stiffness, without any ceremony, without any of them pretending not to see the others. Wren told Jonah in her small, clear voice about how Adeline had stitched his shoulder and how she had held the lamp for her. Jonah listened as if the telling of it were more important than the doing of it had been. When Wren finished, he looked at his daughter and said, "You did a brave thing last night, Wren. I am proud of you." And Wren's gray eyes filled up and spilled over quietly, and she wiped them with the back of her hand and kept eating her porridge. Adeline poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table between them and did not trust herself to speak. This, she thought, this is what I came west for. I did not know it was this, but this is what it is. 2 days passed, then 3. The snow began to pack down under the sun. Jonah spent the morning sitting by the fire because Adeline would not let him go back to the barn until the stitches had held for 72 hours, and he grumbled about it in a way that had no heat in it, and she pretended not to hear. In the afternoons, he let her rebandage the wound, and she washed it and patted it dry and pressed a clean compress against it, and every time her hands moved on his bare shoulder, she felt him breathing carefully, as if he were trying not to move under her touch, the way a person tries not to move when a butterfly has landed on the back of their hand. On the 4th day, he caught her wrist as she was tying off the bandage. Not hard, just enough to make her look up. "Adeline." "Yes, Jonah." "I am going to tell you something about Mary." She went very still. She did not want to look away. "All right." Mary was a good woman. She was not a happy one. She did not want to come west. Her people were bankers in Boston, and she thought Montana was a punishment the Lord had handed her for marrying a man her father didn't like. She never settled. For 4 years, she sat at the window in the front room and waited for a letter from her sister that never came the way she wanted it to. And then she got the fever, and she died in 3 days, and Wren was 5 years old. And Wren stood in the yard in her stocking feet and watched them carry her mother out to the wagon to take her to the church, and Wren has not let anyone tell her what to do since. He paused. His thumb moved once against the inside of Adeline's wrist and then went still. "I am telling you this because I do not want you to spend one more night in this house thinking that you are living in Mary's shadow. You are not. Mary was my wife by a mistake we both made. You are my window because you came to a door I did not know I had opened, and you stepped through it, and you did not ask for permission to breathe in here. I did not know that was what I needed. I know now." She could not speak. She was afraid that if she spoke, her voice would come out wrong and break the thing he was saying. "I do not know," he went on slower now, "whether I am going to be able to be what a woman like you deserves. I have been alone for a long time, Adeline. I do not always know how to do the small things. But I am asking you to tell me when I am doing them wrong, and I am telling you right here in this kitchen with a half-stitched shoulder and bacon grease on my chin that I—" He did not finish the sentence. The knock on the front door cut him off. 3 sharp knocks. Not the knock of a neighbor. Not the knock of the sheriff. The knock of a man who wanted to be answered quickly. Adeline felt her blood leave her face. She saw Jonah see it leave. His expression changed, not the warmth draining out of it, but the warmth hardening into something else, the way water hardens into ice. He put the cloth down on the table. He stood up. He went into the front room and lifted the rifle off the hooks over the mantel and checked the breech. "Adeline," he said, "take Wren into the bedroom. Not yours, mine. It has the thick door. Lock it from the inside. You do not come out until I tell you to come out. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Go." She went. She caught Wren's hand, and she walked the child fast, but not running down the short hallway into Jonah's room, and she shut the door behind them and turned the key in the lock. Wren did not ask her what was happening. Wren sat down on the edge of her father's bed with her back very straight, and she said in a whisper, "Is it the bad man?" "I don't know," Adeline whispered. "I think so." "Will Papa be all right?" "Your Papa has a rifle, Wren, and a temper. The bad man doesn't know either of those things yet." Wren almost smiled. Out in the front room, the 3 knocks had come again harder. Adeline heard Jonah's boots cross the plank floor. She heard the bar of the front door lift. She heard the door swing open and the sudden blast of cold air. And then she heard a voice she had not heard in 5 months, a voice she had hoped to the Lord God she would never hear again, and the sound of it went through her body like a cold iron bar. "Rainer, is it?" The voice was smooth, educated, a little amused. "My name is Rufus Blackwood. I am here to collect my property." Adeline pressed her hand against her mouth. Wren, who had understood perhaps half of the words, but had understood the tone, entirely pressed herself against Adeline's side. Mr. Jonah's voice came back level low, a Montana voice talking to a Missouri voice, and not bothering to hide the difference. I do not know you, and I do not have any of your property on my ranch. You will want to turn your horse around. Oh, I think you do. Adeline could hear the sound of boots on the porch boards. Rufus had taken a step forward. Rufus had always taken a step forward when he was told to step back. It was one of the things about him that had made her sleep with the kitchen knife. I have a contract signed by Silas Dorsey of Jackson County, Missouri, dated the 12th of June this year for the hand of his stepdaughter, Adeline Marguerite Calloway, in marriage. $250 cash money changed hands. The girl broke that contract and ran west. I have a right under law. Mr. Jonah's voice had dropped another half step. You have a contract under Missouri law with a man who is not her father for a marriage that never took place. You do not have a contract under Montana law with anyone for anything. My wife has been in this house under my name and my roof for 6 weeks. The paperwork is filed in Helena. You can read it for yourself when you get back to town. Whatever Silas Dorsey took from you, you will need to take back from him. It is not on my ranch. Your wife. The voice changed. The amusement went out of it and something colder came in. Oh, Rainer, I don't think you understand what you bought. I did not buy anything. I married a woman. You married a liar. Rufus's voice had the patient, savoring tone of a man who had been waiting to say something ugly. Did she tell you, Mr. Rainer, that her stepfather and I had a business arrangement going back 2 years? Did she tell you that she lived in my boarding house for the last 6 months before she ran, and that she took her meals at my table, and that she walked out with me to the Methodist picnic in May, and that she was not unwilling? Did she tell you that there was an understanding between us, signed or unsigned, and that she took $250 of my money as part of that understanding, and then she used it to buy a train ticket west? Did your new wife tell you she was a thief as well as a runaway? Mr. Rainer, there was a long silence. In the locked room, Adeline closed her eyes and felt the floor tilt under her. Half of what Rufus had said was a lie. Half of it was not. She had not taken $250, she had taken $12 that were her own wages. She had walked out with him one time to the Methodist picnic because her stepfather had told her if she did not, he would beat her, and she had gone because her ribs were still healing from the last time. She had lived in his boarding house because her stepfather had made her. The pieces of the story were true the way a skinning knife is true, sharp and narrow, and not enough of the animal to feed anyone. But she had not told Jonah. She had not told him about the boarding house or the walk at the picnic or the $12 she had taken or the kitchen knife. She had said my circumstances in Missouri had become dangerous to my person, and she had left it at that. She had told herself she was sparing him. She had not considered that a man like Rufus Blackwood standing on a porch in Montana in the cold would finish the telling for her in the worst possible words. Adeline, Wren whispered, You're not a thief, are you? No, Wren, I am not. Then Papa won't believe him. I don't know what your Papa will believe. Outside the bedroom door, the silence on the porch had gone on too long. Adeline heard Jonah's voice finally low, flat, unreadable. Mr. Blackwood, I am going to tell you this one time. Get off my porch. Get on your horse. Ride back to Dry Fork. Whatever claim you think you have, take it to Sheriff Holloway. If I see you on my land again, I will shoot you myself, and the sheriff will not lift a finger because I will be within my rights. Do you understand me? I understand you, Rainer. I understand you better than you think. Rufus laughed short, cold. I'll be in Dry Fork at the Silver Mountain Hotel for 3 days. Tell your wife I am waiting for her to come and pay me what she owes. After 3 days, I take the matter to the territorial court, and I will bring every witness from Jackson County who can say they saw her at my table and on my arm. We'll see what Montana thinks of her reputation then. Adeline heard his boots on the porch boards going away. She heard a horse mount, heard hooves on packed snow. She heard after a long moment the front door close. She heard the bar drop back into place. She heard Jonah's boots cross the front room and stop. She unlocked the bedroom door. She did not go out into the front room right away. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. He was standing in the middle of the room with the rifle cradled across his forearm, and his face turned toward the window, and he was looking out at the snow with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not even the first night in the wagon. It was not anger, it was something worse. It was the expression of a man who has just been told that the story he had begun to believe was not the story he was in. Jonah, don't. His voice was very quiet. He did not turn around. Don't, Adeline, not yet. I need a minute. She waited. She stood in the bedroom doorway with Wren behind her, and she waited while the man she had begun to love counted to whatever number he needed to count to. When he finally turned around, his face was not cold. His face was worse than cold. It was still the way a pond is still when the water has frozen all the way through. How much of what he said was true, he asked. Jonah. How much, Adeline? Plain answer. Some of the words were true, none of the meaning. That is not a plain answer. Then I will give you a plain answer. Her voice was shaking. She did not try to stop it. She had decided at her mother's grave when she was 15 that she would not lie to save herself, and she was not going to start now. I lived in his boarding house for 5 months. My stepfather put me there because he owed Rufus Blackwood money and he could not pay it. I took my meals at his table because I had no other table. I walked with him once to the Methodist picnic in May because my stepfather told me if I did not, he would break my hand, and I believed him because he had broken 2 of my fingers the month before for burning a biscuit. I took $12 from the dressmaking shop where I worked my own wages money I had earned, and I bought a stagecoach ticket to St. Louis and walked into the matrimonial agency, and I asked them to send me as far west as they could send a woman for $12. I did not take $250. I did not sign anything. I was never promised to him by anyone whose promise I was bound to honor. I told you about my stepfather, and I did not tell you about Rufus, and I did not tell you about the boarding house, and I am sorry, Jonah. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid you would hear the word boarding house and decide I was something I was not. She swallowed, her voice cracked. Afraid you would decide what you are deciding right now. He looked at her for a long time. She saw him weigh what she had said. She saw him want to believe her. She saw him under the wanting to believe running up against every stone wall he had ever built around himself, against the dead wife in the ground behind the house, against the 3 years he had spent alone with a child who would not let him hold her, against the ledger book. Carefulness of a man who had decided a long time ago that feelings were an expense he could not afford. Adeline, and his voice had gone low and flat. I asked you at this table 4 nights ago whether there was anything else I should know before this man came. Anything else. Those were the words I used. Do you remember? I remember. And you said you would tell me one thing when you were ready. And I accepted that because I thought the one thing was, I do not know what I thought it was. A family matter. A thing a woman keeps to herself out of pride. I did not think the one thing was a man on a porch telling me my wife had walked on his arm at a picnic. I walked on his arm because I was afraid he would. I know. He cut her off, but not harshly. I know why you walked on his arm. I am not saying you did wrong. I am saying. He stopped. He set the rifle down on the table. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. I am saying I do not know how to trust a woman who did not trust me enough to tell me the thing that was going to come knocking on my door. Jonah, I was going to. Where are you? When I was sure of you. The words came out before she could soften them, and she heard how they landed. She saw him hear them. She saw the small exact moment when Jonah Rainer understood that his wife, whom he had begun to love, had been waiting to be sure of him before she gave him the rest of her history, and she saw in the next exact moment that he did not know how to make that all right, because he had also been waiting to be sure of her, and neither of them had told the other. And now a man in a black coat had stood on his porch and told him first. I need some air, he said. Jonah. I need some air, Adeline, please. He took his coat from the hook. He took his hat. He went out the back door into the snow, and he walked across the yard to the barn, and she saw him disappear inside, and he did not come back for 3 hours. She sat at the kitchen table with Wren pressed against her side, and she did not cry because Wren was watching, and she had a lifetime of not crying in front of children who needed her to be calm. She fed Wren. She put Wren down for an afternoon nap because Wren's face was gray with tiredness. She washed the dishes from breakfast. Her hands worked. Her mind was a long, white, blank field with one small, dark thought walking across it. You waited too long. You waited too long. You waited too long. When Jonah came back in at dusk, he did not take off his coat. He sat down at the table across from her without meeting her eyes. "I'm going to ride to Dry Fork in the morning," he said. His voice was the voice of a man who had spent 3 hours in a coal barn making a hard decision. "I am going to see Sheriff Holloway, and I am going to file a formal statement about Blackwood's visit. Then I am going to go to the Silver Mountain Hotel, and I am going to have a conversation with the man himself. I want the threat off this house before it gets any closer." "I will come with you." "No. Jonah, this is my—" "No, Adeline." He looked up at her finally, and his eyes were tired in a way that frightened her more than anger would have. "Not because I am ashamed of you, because he wants you there. Because the whole point of what he said on my porch this morning was to make you come to him in a hotel with money in your hand so that he could say afterward to any court that you came to him willingly. I am not giving him that. You will stay here with Wren. I will ride alone." "What are you going to do to him?" "I do not know yet." "Jonah." She reached across the table. She did not quite touch his hand. "Please. Whatever you are feeling about me right now, whatever the words on the porch did to the way you see me, please do not do something in that hotel that will take you away from Wren. She has lost one mother. She cannot lose a father in a jail cell." He looked down at her hands so close to his and not touching. He looked at it for a long moment. "I am not going to do anything that will take me away from Wren." He paused. "I am also not sure, Adeline, whether I am going to be able to come back to this kitchen and look at you the same way I was looking at you an hour before that knock on the door. I am not telling you that to hurt you. I am telling you that because you asked me to tell you when I did not know how to do the small things. I am telling you I do not know how to do this small thing. I am going to ride to Dry Fork, and I am going to deal with the man, and I am going to come back, and then you and I are going to sit at this table, and we are going to say every true thing we have not said yet. Both of us. Do you agree?" "I agree." "All right." He stood up. He went to his room. He did not eat supper. Adeline sat at the table and listened to Wren's soft breathing from the bedroom and the hiss of the stove and the thin wail of wind around the corner of the house. And at some point, she did not know when she understood that she was going to have to do something, and she was going to have to do it before Jonah rode to Dry Fork in the morning, because if she waited any longer, she was going to wind him to his own carefulness and to the kind of decision he would make by himself in a hotel room that would not save him the way he thought it would. She went to her room. She pulled her carpet bag out from under the bed. She opened it. Under her second-best calico and her mother's Bible and the little cloth bag with the wedding ring was the folded letter, the letter her mother had given her in the last month of her life and told her to open when she was in a safe place. She took it out. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed. She broke the seal. She read it. She read it twice. She read it a third time to be sure. And then she sat very still on the edge of the bed, with her mother's handwriting on her lap, and understood for the first time what her mother had meant by a safe place. It was not a place with a latch on a door. It was a place where you could tell the truth out loud and still be loved on the other side of it. Adeline folded the letter. She put it in the pocket of her apron. She blew out the candle. She did not sleep. In the morning before dawn, before Jonah's boots sounded on the plank floor of his room, before the rooster in the yard had decided the sky was light enough the door to complain about, she dressed in her warmest dress, in her wool coat and her bonnet, and she went into the kitchen and she left a note on the pine table where he would find it when he came for his coffee. The note said, "Jonah, I have gone to Dry Fork alone. Do not follow me yet. I have something that belongs to both of us, and I am going to put it in the sheriff's hand before I put it in yours. I will be at the sheriff's office at 9 o'clock this morning. Please come there, not to the hotel. I am not running from you. I am running toward the part of this that I should have told you first." She banked the fire. She took the lantern. She walked out across the snow to the barn, and she saddled the gentler of the two geldings, the way Jonah had shown her one afternoon, and she led the horse out into the pale blue dark of the last hour before dawn, and she mounted clumsy skirts, bunched the cold biting through her gloves, and she turned the horse's head toward Dry Fork Valley. In her apron pocket against her heart was her mother's letter, and folded inside her mother's letter was a second piece of paper, a paper her mother had been keeping for 8 years, a paper Adeline had not known existed until last night. It was a bank draft drawn on a street, Lewis Bank, in the name of Adeline Marguerite Calloway, in the amount of $1,200. It had been her grandmother's inheritance. Her mother had hidden it from Silas Dorsey because she had known from the day she married him what kind of man he was. And at the bottom of her mother's letter, in a handwriting that was already trembling with the fever that would kill her, her mother had written, "Use this to be free, my Adeline. Use it to pay any debt any man ever claims you owe him, even a debt that is not real. Pay him in full and in front of witnesses, and walk away with your head up, and never let any man tell you again that you were bought. You were not bought. You were your grandmother's, and you were mine, and now you are your own." Adeline rode east toward Dry Fork Valley under a sky the color of a new bruise turning into a new day. The horse's breath made white clouds in the cold air. Her hands were steady on the reins. In her pocket, the paper with her grandmother's money and her mother's love on it pressed against her like a small warm hand. She did not know what she would say to Rufus Blackwood when she put the bank draft on the table in Sheriff Holloway's office and told him to take it and leave Montana and never put his boot on the porch of a Rainer ranch again. She did not know whether Jonah would forgive her for riding out alone. She did not know whether he would meet her at the sheriff's office at 9 o'clock or whether he would ride past her to the hotel and she would have to run out into the street and catch his bridle. She did know one thing. She knew that the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in October with a carpet bag and a latch on her door was not the woman riding east through the snow in December. That woman had needed to be kept safe. This woman had decided to keep herself. The sheriff's office in Dry Fork Valley was a single-room building of squared logs on the west side of the town square, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner, a wall of wanted posters gone brown at the edges, and a desk by the window, where Sheriff Bram Holloway was eating a cold biscuit and drinking a hot cup of coffee. When the door opened at 5 minutes to 9 and a small woman in a snow-dusted wool coat walked in. He set down the biscuit. He stood up. "Mrs. Rainer." "Good morning, Sheriff." Her voice was steady. Her cheeks were red from the ride. There was a film of frost on the edge of her bonnet. "I would like to make a statement, and I would like a witness present who is not my husband. I have a document I need to register with you, and I have information about Rufus Blackwood that I believe the territorial court will want to hear. May I sit down?" "You may, ma'am, please." He pulled out the chair in front of his desk with the careful courtesy of a man who had been taught by his mother and had not forgotten. He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove without asking whether she wanted one. He set it in front of her. "Start at the beginning, Mrs. Rainer. Take your time. I have all morning." She took her time. She told him about Silas Dorsey and the broken fingers. She told him about the 5 months in the boarding house. She told him about the Methodist picnic and the kitchen knife under her pillow. She told him about the $12 of her own wages and the stagecoach ticket west. She told him more slowly about the letter at the bottom of her carpet bag that she had not opened until the night before, and about her grandmother's money that her mother had hidden from Silas Dorsey for 8 years, and about the bank draft for $1,200 that was at that moment folded in her apron pocket. She took the letter and the bank draft out and laid them on the sheriff's desk, and she watched his eyes move across her mother's handwriting, and she watched him read the amount on the draft, and she watched him look up at her with an expression she had not seen on a lawman's face before. "Ma'am," he said very quietly, "this changes the shape of things. It does not change what Mr. Blackwood is owed. He is owed nothing. I took nothing of his, but it gives me the means to make him take nothing out loud and in front of a witness and sign a paper saying so. And I would like to do that this morning, Sheriff, if you will help me, for he has time to go to the court and before my husband has time to go to the hotel." The sheriff looked at her for a long moment. "Your husband," he said, "is tying his horse to my hitching rail right now, Mrs. Rainer. He has been standing in the snow outside this window for the last 2 minutes, waiting for you to finish. He came in behind you." He did not want to interrupt. Adeline turned in her chair. Through the frost-edged window, she saw Jonah Rainer standing on the boardwalk with his hat in his hand and his breath making slow white clouds in the cold, and he was not looking away from her. He had been looking at her through the window the whole time. He had ridden into Dry Fork behind her on the same road in the same pale blue dawn, and he had found her horse at the sheriff's hitching rail and he had not burst in and he had not rushed her. He had stood in the snow and he had waited for her to finish her own sentence. She went to the door. She opened it. The cold came in around her and the smell of horse and leather and the particular metal scent of Montana snow. Jonah. Adeline, I left you a note. I read the note. I am not angry about the note. I am angry that I did not understand you well enough to know you were going to leave one. He paused. May I come in? I do not want to stand out here in the snow while you say something I need to hear. Come in. He came in. He nodded to Sheriff Holloway and took off his coat and stood with his hat in his hands at the end of the sheriff's desk. And he looked down at the letter and the bank draft without touching either of them. And then he looked at Adeline. Is that your mother's hand? Yes. Did you open it this morning? Last night, after you went to bed. I am sorry I did not come and wake you and read it with you. I did not know yet whether you would still want to hear what was in it. Adeline, you should. His voice had gone low and rough. You should have woken me. I know that now. I should have come to your room before I went to my own. I knew it then. I did not do it because I am a coward about the things that matter. I am telling you so you will know. He set his hat on the desk. I want to tell the sheriff what I am going to tell him, and then I want you to tell the sheriff what you are going to tell him, and then I want the three of us to go to the Silver Mountain Hotel and do this thing together. Not you alone, not me alone, but together. Is that something you can agree to? Yes, Jonah. All right. He turned to the sheriff. Sheriff Holloway, I would like to register formally a statement that the woman in front of you is my wife by law and by choice, and that any man who puts his hand or his voice against her in this county will answer to me first and to you second. I will sign anything you want me to sign to that effect, and I will sign it in her presence so that she will never again have to wonder whether I am going to choose her when the day comes to choose. Jonah, her voice broke on his name. I am not finished, Adeline. Yes, Jonah. He turned back to her. He reached across the desk and he took her hand. Not by the wrist the way he had taken it to stitch the cut. By the hand the way a man takes the hand of a woman he means to keep. I have been trying it, he said. Since the morning I gave you the lavender to give you small things without saying what they meant, because I did not trust myself to say it out loud. I am going to say it out loud now in a sheriff's office because I do not want the first time I say it to be in a room where we are alone and you might think I only meant it because we were alone to get him on. I love you, Adeline Rainer. I loved you before I had the words for it. I have loved you since the morning you told my daughter you were not going to take her mother's place and meant it. I have loved you since you called to me from a snowstorm and said, come back. I was going to tell you in the kitchen yesterday, and a man I hate interrupted me. I am not letting him have that sentence. That sentence belongs to you. It belonged to you before he knocked on my door, and it still does. The sheriff cleared his throat politely and looked very hard at the wall of wanted posters. Adeline could not speak. Her eyes were full. Her free hand was pressed against her mouth. She nodded because she could do that, and she held onto his hand because she could do that too. And Jonah Rainer, who had not touched her on purpose in the 6 weeks since she had stepped off a stagecoach into his town, lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips very briefly and very gently against the pale pink line of the scar where he had put 3 stitches across her palm in October. Then he lowered her hand and kept hold of it. All right, he said. His voice was a little uneven. Sheriff, shall we go and see Mr. Blackwood? Sheriff Holloway folded the bank draft and the letter and put them inside his own coat. We shall. The 3 of them walked from the sheriff's office across the snowy square of Dry Fork Valley to the Silver Mountain Hotel. The town was waking up. 2 old men in front of the feed store stopped talking to watch them pass. The woman sweeping the boardwalk in front of the milliner's paused with her broom in midair. A small boy on a pony in the middle of the street stopped pretending to be a cavalry officer and stared. Everyone in the valley, Adeline understood, had heard already that a stranger had ridden into town the day before and threatened Jonah Rainer on his own porch. Everyone in the valley knew that the Rainers and the sheriff walking across the square this morning meant the story was coming to its middle or its end. Rufus Blackwood was at a table in the front parlor of the Silver Mountain Hotel, drinking coffee, dressed in a black frock coat with a red cravat, his hat on the chair beside him. He looked up when the three of them came in, and his face did a thing Adeline had seen it do before, the amusement settling over the calculation never going away underneath. Mr. Rainer, and the sheriff. What a gathering. Mr. Blackwood, Sheriff Holloway pulled out a chair without being asked. Sit down, Jonah. Mrs. Rainer, please take this chair. I will sit here. He laid his hand on the back of a fourth chair and looked at Rufus. Mr. Blackwood, we are going to have a conversation, and I am going to invite a witness to it. And if at any point in the conversation you stand up or raise your voice or reach for anything inside your coat, I am going to arrest you and put you in my jail until the circuit judge comes through next month. Do we understand each other? We understand each other, Sheriff. Rufus's voice was silk over gravel. Good. The sheriff turned to Adeline. Mrs. Rainer, you have the floor. Adeline reached into her apron pocket, the same pocket where the letter had been, and she took out the bank draft. She set it on the table in front of Rufus Blackwood. She laid her hand flat on the table beside it. Mr. Blackwood, she said, this is a bank draft in the amount of $1,200 drawn on the St. Louis Merchants Bank. It is payable to me. It was my grandmother's inheritance held in trust for me by my mother, hidden from my stepfather for 8 years because my mother did not trust him not to take it. I did not know it existed until last night. Rufus's eyes moved to the draft. His expression did not change, but his shoulders did a small adjustment under the black frock coat, the way a man shifts when the weight of something in the room has turned out to be different than he expected. I am telling you about this draft, Adeline went on, because I want you to know that I have the money to make you go away if I wanted to give it to you. I have more money in this pocket than you claim my stepfather took from you. I could take this paper to the bank. This morning, get it cashed, count out $250 in front of this sheriff, and put it in your hand, and you would walk out of Dry Fork Valley with more cash in your pocket than you have probably ever walked out of a town with. Do we understand each other so far? Mr. Blackwood? We understand each other, Miss Calloway. Mrs. Rainer. Mrs. Rainer, please continue. I am not going to give you the $250. His face twitched. I am not going to give you the $250, she said again very steady, because I do not owe you the $250, and I am not going to pay a debt that is not mine just to make a liar more comfortable. I am also not going to give you the $250 because the money is not mine to give to a man like you. It is my grandmother's. It was my mother's. It is going to be used, every dollar of it, for the things my mother told me to use it for, which were any debt any man ever claims you owe him, and the debt I am paying this morning is not owed to you. It is owed to me. For 8 years of a stepfather's house. For 5 months in a boarding parlor I did not want to sit in. For one walk on your arm at a picnic that I took because I was afraid of what would happen to my hand if I did not. For a kitchen knife under a pillow. The debt is mine, Mr. Blackwood, and I am paying it to myself this morning, and I am paying it by saying all of this out loud to a sheriff and a husband and to you, so that the next time a story about me comes out of your mouth, there will be 3 people in this town who know what the truth of it was. She picked up the bank draft. She folded it. She put it back in her pocket. That's it, Rufus said. His voice had thinned. You came here to say no. I came here to say no in front of a witness. And I came here to say one more thing. She leaned a little across the table. Her eyes did not waver from his. If you ride out of Dry Fork Valley this afternoon and you go back to Missouri and you never put my name or my husband's name in your mouth again, Sheriff Holloway is not going to do anything to you. If you stay in this town past supper time, Sheriff Holloway is going to arrest you for the threats you made on the porch of my husband's ranch yesterday, which are witnessed, and he is going to put you in a cell. And when the circuit judge comes, he is going to hear the statement I have just made in the sheriff's office this morning, and he is going to read a letter from my mother that names you and names my stepfather and names the arrangement between you, and you are going to stand in a courtroom in Helena and try to explain to a Montana judge why a young woman paid her way west with $12 of her own wages to get away from a man who now wants the court to believe she was his promised bride. Do you think a Montana judge will take your side in that story, Mr. Blackwood? Do you really? Rufus Blackwood did not answer. He did not have to. His face had already answered. The calculation had finished. The answer had come back negative. Now, Swarm, Sheriff Holloway leaned forward. Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to make this easier. There is a stage leaving Dry Fork Valley at 2 o'clock this afternoon, bound east to Miles City and from there to the railhead. I am going to walk you to the livery at 1:30. I am going to watch you pay your hotel bill. I am going to stand on the platform and watch you get on the stage. And if you ever set foot in my county again, I will know about it before your boots touch the ground, and I will meet you at the edge of town with a pair of irons. Are we clear? Rufus Blackwood picked up his hat. He did not look at Jonah. He did not look at Adeline. He looked at the sheriff, and he said with the small, sour smile of a man who had lost a hand of cards and was not going to let anyone see him wince. We are clear, Sheriff. I will be on the stage. He stood. He walked out of the front parlor of the Silver Mountain Hotel. The door closed behind him. A log shifted in the parlor fireplace. The desk clerk, who had been pretending to count receipts for the last 5 minutes, looked up and immediately looked down again. Adeline let out a breath she had been holding for so long she had forgotten her body was holding it. Sheriff Holloway, she said, thank you. Mrs. Rainer. The sheriff was smiling a tired, proud smile, the smile of a man who had been expecting to have to do something hard and had found to his surprise that the hard thing had been done for him by the smallest person in the room. It was my honor. I am going to walk him to that stage myself. You two go home. He picked up his hat. And Jonah, if I were you, I would listen very carefully for the rest of your life when that woman decides she has something to say. Sheriff, Jonah said, I am going to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that. They rode home through the middle of the day under a blue sky so bright it made the snow look white hot. They did not talk for the first mile. Jonah rode the big bay gelding Adeline had taken that morning, and she rode behind him on his own saddle horse, and the horse's hooves made a steady crunching sound in the packed snow of the road, and the sun was warm on the backs of their coats in a way that felt like the first promise of a thaw, even though the thaw was months away. In the second mile, Jonah pulled his horse to a walk beside hers. Adeline. Yes, Jonah. In the sheriff's office. When I said what I said, I want to say it again where no one else is listening, and I want you to hear it in the right voice this time. All right. He turned in his saddle. His eyes in the hard Montana sunlight were the blue of a creek where the trout hide and the bottom is deep, and she saw all the way down to the bottom of them what he was about to say before he said it. I love you. His voice was very quiet. I am sorry I took so long. I am sorry I made you sleep in a cold room. I am sorry I let you carry a secret for 6 weeks because I was too slow to earn the telling of it. I am going to be better. I am going to be as good a husband to you as you have been a wife to me. And when I am not, I want you to tell me so in plain words at the kitchen table, and I am going to listen because I have learned this morning that you are a woman who should be listened to. Jonah, I am also going to tell you one more thing, and then you can say whatever you need to say, and I am going to listen to that too. All right, I am going to be Ren's father for the rest of my life. I am going to be your husband for the rest of my life. I am not asking you to be Ren's mother because you already told her on the first night that you were not going to take that from her. But I am asking you, Adeline Rainer, to be my wife the way a wife is usually asked to be a wife. When you are ready, not tonight, not next week, not because I am asking, when you are ready. And I want you to know, I'm going to wait however long that takes because I have learned that the things worth having in a house are worth waiting for. Adeline pulled her horse up. So did he. She sat in the saddle under the blue Montana sky with her hands crossed on the pommel and her heart doing something she had not felt it do since she was a small girl and had not yet learned how much of the world was going to try to break her. And she looked across the small space between the two horses at the man she had married under duress and was now going to marry again in her own heart without any duress at all. Jonah Rainer, she said, I am going to tell you the one thing I did not tell the sheriff. All right, the part of your speech at the kitchen table yesterday morning that you did not get to finish before the knock on the door. You had said you were telling me something and you had not finished the sentence. Do you remember what the sentence was? He looked at her. I do. Finish it now, please. He smiled. It was a small smile, the kind a tired man smiles when he has not smiled in a long time and has just remembered how. I was going to say that I was telling you with a half-stitched shoulder and bacon grease on my chin that I love you more than I have loved anyone since my mother held me on her lap when I was 4 years old and told me the story of how the morning star got its light. That was the sentence, Adeline. That is the sentence. All right. All right, what? All right, yes. To the question you asked in the saddle, not tonight, not tomorrow night, but sooner than you think, Jonah Rainer. Because I have been ready for a longer time than I knew, and I only needed to watch you hold my hand in front of a sheriff to know how ready I was. He laughed a startled, slightly shaky laugh, the laugh of a man who had not laughed in a long time and was being reminded what his own laugh sounded like. He reached across the small space between the horses and took her gloved hand in his gloved hand, and he lifted it the way he had lifted it in the sheriff's office, and he pressed his lips against the back of her wool glove, and then he put her hand back on her pommel, and they rode on together down the road toward the ranch at the bottom of the shallow draw, where two creeks met under a sky so blue it made her want to sing. Wren was in the yard when they came around the bend. She had been watching the road. The moment she saw them, she dropped the armload of kindling she was carrying, and she ran. She ran in her two big boots across the packed snow with her braids flying out behind her, and Jonah swung down from his horse and caught her up in his good arm and spun her once, and Wren pressed her face into his collar and said something Adeline could not hear, but could guess, and then Wren twisted in Jonah's arm and reached out with her small bare hand and caught the hem of Adeline's coat where Adeline was still sitting on the horse, and she tugged it twice hard, like a child pulling a bell rope, and she said, "Come down, Mama, come inside. I made you tea." Adeline did not correct her. She swung down from the saddle into the snow, and she knelt in the yard in her good coat, and she opened her arms, and Wren walked into them and stayed there. Jonah stood above them with his hat in his hand and the sun on his face, and a look Adeline had never seen on him before, the look of a man who had been waiting 3 years to watch his daughter call a woman mama, and had just watched it happen, and was not ever going to forget how the light had been at the exact moment it did. That night, after Wren was asleep with Beatrice the hen in her flannel box beside her bed, Jonah and Adeline sat at the kitchen table in the yellow lamplight with 2 cups of coffee between them, and they said every true thing they had not said yet. She told him about her fingers and the kitchen knife. He told her about the night Mary had died and about the 3 months afterward when he had not spoken a word to anyone, not even to Wren. She told him about her grandmother, whose money was going to buy a new roof for the barn and new wire for the hen house and a set of real school books for Wren and a proper cook stove for the kitchen, and whatever was left after that was going into a lockbox at the bank in Helena against the day Wren was grown and needed her own $12 to choose her own life with. He told her that Hester Vance had once 4 summers ago at a 4th of July picnic cornered him behind the church and told him that she was prepared to be the second Mrs. Rainer whenever he felt the time was right, and that he had answered her that the time was not ever going to be right, and that he had not thought of that conversation again until Hester herself had made it clear in the first weeks after the stagecoach that she had not taken his answer as final. Adeline told him that Hester had called on her and asked in a careful voice whether the new Miss Rainer understood how much room there was in this house for a replacement, and Jonah's jaw had tightened, and his hand on the coffee cup had gone white at the knuckle, and Adeline had taken the cup gently out of his hand and set it on the table and said, "She will not come again, Jonah. I sent her away once, and she knows the road." And Jonah had looked at her across the lamp and with something very much like awe and said, "Adeline Rainer, I did not know when I placed that advertisement in the St. Louis paper what kind of woman was going to answer it, and I do not think I would believe the answer if you had not ridden out of my yard before dawn this morning with a bank draft in your pocket and brought the whole thing home at noon." She reached across the table. She took it his hand on. She did not let go of it. "Jonah." "Yes." "Last question. The one from the saddle. I want to answer it again now that we have said the rest. Are you asking me to be your wife for the rest of my life, the real way, and the whole way off?" "I am asking." "Then my answer is yes. This time it is yes because I am choosing it. Not because a reverend put a form on a table and I signed it. Because you put your hand around mine in a sheriff's office and I knew I was home." He stood up from the table. He came around to her side. He knelt on one knee on the plank floor of the kitchen, the way a man in a city would kneel to propose in a parlor with a ring, except that he did not have a ring, and the woman in front of him was already his wife on paper. And what he was offering her was not a beginning, but a belated and chosen confirmation of a thing that had already grown up around them without permission. He took both her hands in both of his. "Adeline Marguerite Rainer," he said, "this time, do you choose me? I choose you. Say it the way you said it to yourself on the stagecoach when you were $12 from nothing and you were afraid but not." She smiled. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She had decided a long time ago to spend her crying sparingly. "I choose you, Jonah Rainer," she said. "I choose you in the cold and in the thaw. I choose you in your grief and in mine. I choose you under the lavender, and I choose you in the snow. I choose you for the rest of the mornings I get to make your coffee, and for the rest of the nights I get to hear Wren ask for one more story before bed. I choose you because you gave me a room with a latch on the door, and then you taught me I was not going to need it. I choose you." He leaned forward and he kissed her, slowly, carefully, the first kiss on the mouth between them, with the yellow lamp on the pine table and the stove ticking in the corner, and Wren asleep in the next room with a hen in a flannel box, and she kissed him back, and his hand cupped the side of her face the way it had cupped it in the chair on the night of the storm. Except this time he did not take the hand away. Outside over the Rainer Ranch at the bottom of the shallow draw, where two creeks met, the stars had come out over a sky that was clearer and colder and more full of light than any sky Adeline had ever slept under. The first real snow of the winter had already fallen and been walked across and frozen into the shape of a story that could be read in the morning by anyone willing to kneel down and look at the tracks. There were the tracks of a horse that had carried a frightened woman east before dawn. There were the tracks of a second horse that had carried her husband after her, at a careful distance, close enough to catch her if she fell, and far enough not to crowd her. There were the tracks of the two of them riding home together in the middle of the day with the sun on their backs. There were the tracks of a small girl running out of a house to meet them in the snow, with the tracks of an armload of dropped kindling scattered around her feet, like the stars of a very small constellation. And there, at the end of all of those tracks, was a log house with smoke rising from the chimney in a thin, steady line, and three people inside it who had at different times and in different ways each crossed a threshold they had not expected to cross, and who had decided not because the Lord had made it easy, but because each of them had been brave at exactly the right moment to stay on the warm side of the door together. 6 months later, on a morning in late May, when the wildflowers were up on the slopes above the ranch, and the cottonwoods by the creek had put on their new leaves, the Reverend Parrish rode out to the Rainer place with a Bible and a clean white handkerchief in his pocket. Adeline wore the russet wool dress that Jonah had brought back for her from a trip to Helena in March, the color she had seen on another woman and never thought she would wear herself. Jonah wore his good black coat and a tie he had put on wrong, and Wren had fixed for him with a small, furious frown of concentration. Wren wore a white dress with a sash of blue ribbon, and she carried a handful of lupine from the slope above the creek, and she walked Adeline from the porch of the house to the place under the cottonwoods where the Reverend was waiting. The ceremony was small. There were no guests except Sheriff Holloway, who had ridden out that morning with a buckboard full of good bourbon and a new silver belt buckle for Jonah, and the Reverend's wife, who had brought a cake. The Reverend read the words of the wedding service, slowly and clearly, the way he read them for any couple, the way he had failed to read them for the two of them 7 months before in a cold vestibule, because the groom had not wanted a ceremony then. Jonah said "I do" in a voice that carried across the spring grass to the creek. Adeline said "I do" in a voice that did not shake. When the Reverend said "You may kiss the bride," Jonah lifted Adeline's chin with one careful finger and kissed her the way a man kisses a woman. He has been waiting his whole life to kiss in front of Gon and everybody, and Wren, standing between them with her lupine clutched in both fists, laughed the same half-swallowed, surprised laugh Adeline had heard through her bedroom door on her first night in the house when she had been alone and afraid and the kitchen had smelled like lavender. Except this time the laugh was for her, and this time she was not on the other side of the door.